Welcome back. Now, preparations are well underway ahead of the Pope's visit to Ireland next weekend. He will visit Dublin Castle, the Capuchin Day Centre, Croke Park and Knock during a whistle-stop tour. But the question remains if he will meet victims of clerical sexual abuse and whether or not he will address the issue of child protection in general. Joining me with that story and everything else going on this morning are Sean Defoe, Group Political Correspondent for Communicorp, and Ellen Gunning, Director of the Irish Academy of Public Relations. You're both very welcome.
Good morning.
Now, tell me first of all, Sean, if you can, what do you think needs to happen during this papal visit for us to be able to say the Pope has addressed these issues properly? What do you think?
I think he actually needs to come out and address them and meet with some of the survivors. And we've been hearing from them this week. We've been hearing from them on radio and on television saying, you know, while some people in the Vatican and some of the bishops have acknowledged what went on was terribly wrong, there's never been a huge apology from the Church. There's never been an actual sense of empathy and understanding for what went wrong. It was, oh yeah, that was bad, but we moved that priest on, it's fine, you know. So I think actually addressing it, and when you see what happened in the States as well, it's something that isn't just relevant to Ireland, but has had such an effect on Irish society over the last 50 years, that if the Church wants to have a proper future in Ireland, and if it wants to apologise to those who are Catholic and do really believe in their religion, there needs to be a very strong statement, I think, from Pope Francis on that.
Ellen, how strong?
Oh, it's very hard to know what he can actually do. I was really taken by the comments yesterday from Brendan Leahy, the Bishop of Limerick, and it was the first time I felt a bishop actually nailed it. He highlighted, he's a very quiet-spoken man, so you really have to concentrate on what he says, but his words were very powerful. He highlighted 3 areas. One was the sexual abuse of minors. The second was the treatment, and I haven't heard anybody do this in this way before. The second was the treatment of young people in reformatories. And the third was the treatment of what he described as vulnerable women who needed refuge or protection. Sure. And he said that no matter what amount of good was done, and he acknowledged all the good that was done in the Church, that it wouldn't cover up 3 things. One was sin, which is what you would expect somebody in the Church to say, criminality and evil.
Okay.
Now, sin, criminality, I think criminality and evil are the 2 that lay people see.
Yeah.
And I think that's a change from inside the Church. That's somebody in a position of power inside the Church saying it's about much more than sin or what happened within a community. This is something that affected a much wider community.
Sure.
And we need to come out and say it was evil and it was criminal. And I think if the Pope did that, I think if he followed Brendan Leahy's lead, he would have gone a long, long way. The problem is the structures, and I think Ian Elliott was saying it yesterday. The structures within the Church are so hierarchical that it's very difficult for anybody to say to a bishop or a priest or to a bishop or a cardinal, as you go up the pecking order, you're getting it wrong. You need to come out with a statement.
You can't challenge them.
You can't do this, and they can't be challenged. And that seems to be a huge... It's like it's endemic in loads of organisations, but it's definitely within the Catholic Church as well. And I think the Pope needs to hover over all of that and say, you know, in effect, I am the boss and this stops. The buck stops at my desk and this must stop. And I think they need to say, we're really, really sorry. We completely messed this up. We got it totally wrong. It should never have happened. How can we make redress? Because that should be what the Church is about. It
is a huge pivotal moment. You mentioned Ian Elliott there, and he has said that Pope Francis needs to say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to move forward. These are the initiatives we're going to drive through as well. He also said that canon law must be reformed, and I thought this was really interesting. And outside independent monitoring needs to be introduced in the Church. Now, that makes absolute sense as a layperson. But do you think the Church, the Vatican and the Pope will be self-aware enough to allow for that to happen?
I think Pope Francis probably is.
Yeah.
I think the forces he faces, particularly the more conservative ones within the Catholic Church, are not. And for a lot of the... When he was first elected as pontiff, we all thought this is a reformer. He came out very strongly on a couple of issues. And that's kind of been rolled back since, because of the conservative faction within the Vatican that we've seen have really come out against him. There was even talks at one point of some of them trying to get rid of him, of impeaching the Pope, as it were. But there needs to be an understanding from them that this has been a total mess-up. I don't understand, and I get what he's saying and what you're saying about the hierarchical structure of it, but I don't understand how anyone at any senior level in the Vatican can defend sex abuse and can defend what went on. So there needs to be an understanding, as you said, that they've entirely messed this up, and that does need to come from the top down. I think he needs to bite the bullet and say, right, I'm leading on this and we need to make a change.
As I say, huge pivotal moment. Can I ask you both very briefly, the personal significance of the Pope visiting, does it carry any weight for you? Does it mean anything to you?
I think from my point of view, I'm actually looking at it as a bit of history, because I remember when John Paul came over in 79.
Sure.
And I'm actually comparing the two visits. That's really what it is to me. It's like, wow, what a difference. Because it's in my lifetime, it doesn't feel that long ago. It was 40 years back, although it doesn't feel it. But 40 years ago, like huge swathes of Ireland marched to see the Pope. You couldn't imagine not being, I wasn't there, but you couldn't imagine not being there. I remember my mother-in-law was distraught that she couldn't get to, I think it was Phoenix Park. So she made huge efforts to get down to Maynooth to see him. The whole country wanted to see the Pope.
Sure.
There isn't that same feeling this time. There isn't a feeling that everybody wants to go and see the Pope. There isn't that same feeling of positivity. I think this time there's more...
It's a critical eye this time, isn't it?
It's a critical eye. It's more for really the faithful. As opposed to the last time, it was almost like a superstar coming and everybody was faithful, maybe. This time it's a much more critical eye, and I think we're much more demanding.
I think
we want something from it which is more than a religious experience.
Will you go for personal reasons, of course?
I'll go. I'm probably going to go as a journalist to cover it more so than as personal reasons. But I think it's kind of like I come from a different generation. Ellen is a bit younger, and like when I was looking back at it, I'm sorry, just you're very welcome.
Very discreet,
very discreetly, the way I kind of look back at it, you know, the two big seminal events that are considered, Italian 90 and the Pope, as these big celebrations that were there. But from my generation's point of view, we're looking at it very differently. And you look at the Catholic Church and see all the different bits that went on, and different bits in Irish society, the Magdalene Laundries, the Tune Babies, and go, how in the name of God was that allowed to happen?
Exactly.
And how the Catholic Church seems this big, horrible organisation. But there are those who have their faith in it. So what I'm kind of interested in seeing is that balance. There's a lot of Catholics now who are nearly afraid to say they're Catholics, whereas before it was the opposite.
Sure. Briefly, we need to move on. On the front page of the Times, Sarah Burns tells us that just 8% of properties affordable to those on rental support, and it's nearly impossible for people to move on from emergency and homeless services, is the outcome of a survey conducted by the Simon community. What's going on here?
Unfortunately, not hugely surprising figures. I mean, the HAP payment is quite low. There's a lot of people who don't want to take it on, a lot of landlords. So I'd say even though those properties are available, it's probably an even lower figure of landlords who would actually take people on who are on the payment, because I think there's a bit of misunderstanding about it, a bit of stigma attached to it. They think, oh, maybe you're not very reliable for getting in the rent. But it also shows the massive increase in the prices that has gone on in the last couple of years, where not only are people who are on those kind of payments unable to afford a house, but people who are on quite good salaries are unable to afford to rent and get a house. So it shows what has been highlighted over the last 2 years. There needs to be a massive build. There possibly needs to be a massive social house build as well to actually deal with the crisis and to help get people out of homelessness.
Just briefly, Ellen, then, because there are so few options out there, as this survey very clearly demonstrates, where are people going? What's happening to people and to families that can't find anywhere? It's
really tough for them. You talk to young couples and they're both professional, they're both working, they have a young family, and they're telling you they have no hope of ever buying a house. And they need to rent, and even if they can afford to rent, the rent takes proportionately much more, a greater percentage of their salary than it should, and they have no security of tenure. So they can be thrown out at any time, or the lease is quite short. It's a 2-year, 9-month lease or something. I think the government needs to grasp the nettle in a number of different ways. They need to make renting more secure. It shouldn't be a bad thing. You should be able to decide at 20 that actually you never want to own property, thank you very much, and you'll probably rent for the rest of your life, but you should have a security of tenure that goes with it. They need much more social housing. We built all this social housing years ago. We sold it all off to people. In hindsight, we should have kept it. So social housing, I think, you need to remove that. It's not a stigma, but you need to remove that thing about you're in social housing. What difference does it make? None. Somebody has built you a beautiful house, and social housing is probably the best built housing ever. And we've seen all the cowboy builders who built apartments.
This is true.
So we need to build more social houses, I think. And the third thing is we need to really sit on the banks much more and say, if people want to buy, if they're earning reasonably good salaries, and apparently Dublin is more expensive to live in than, was it Genoa, somewhere in Switzerland anyway.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
If they're earning good salaries, banks should be able to find a way to allow them to buy a property if they want to. So maybe it means the 25-year mortgage becomes a 35-year mortgage. So it becomes getting a mortgage is a serious decision
exactly,
anyway, but you need to give people much more
There
options.
absolutely needs to be options. That definitely is the pivotal word that we should emphasise on. And I understand your good self. You were watching the presidential election gather momentum last night. Was it down in Carlow?
Down in Carlow County Council.
Tell me what happened. What did you see? What did you see?
Oh, nice and entertaining. I can't wait for this selection.
Go on,
After
go on.
seeing yesterday.
The highlights, please. Just the highlights.
Just the highlights. Kevin Sharkey defending Donald Trump, I think, was up there.
Brave man, Mr.
Brave man
Sharkey,
to come out
brave
and
man.
say that he's not doing the worst job, and he won 50 quid on him getting the presidential
Did he
win in
really?
the end. Apparently,
gas man.
he just got the point across that you'd rather have an effective boss than a nice boss, and that's
Sure.
the way that he saw Trump going. I think some of the other bits that were Gavin Duffy had a couple of pops at Michael D. Higgins, says he wants to be more than a president who has tea parties in the Oris, and wants to see the office of the president opened up a bit more, so we can see just how they're spending money, and lots of just I mean, one of the candidates, Patrick Feeney, promised a sugar beet factory for Carlow, and that both Carlow and Waterford should have their own universities, which isn't too unrealistic maybe. So it's going to be an entertaining race. I think a few of them, I think Gavin Duffy and Joan Freeman certainly will get nominations that should go forward. Kevin Sharkey possibly will. He's in the frame for it. But it's going to be an interesting race.
Very, very briefly, Ellen, do you think this is going to get dirty? Is this campaign going to get down and nasty?
I don't know if it's going to get dirty, but it's going to get very lively. I loved Joan Freeman's comment. Now, I wasn't there, but I saw the comment that she said that Michael D. Higgins should not be asked to reveal his medical records. And I thought, oh, who actually asked him? Because this is pure politics.
Was it George Hook?
Answer
George
a
Hook
question
mentioned
that
it.
possibly
Well, I
hasn't
actually asked
been
her the
asked.
question yesterday, so there's your answer.
But it's brilliant. That's the kind of thing that I love. It's like pop an answer to a question out there that may not actually have been asked.
Yeah.
I think it's going to get very interesting. Joan Freeman, just while I mention her, is the third woman to run with a background from charity.
Okay.
We haven't had a woman running from business. We've had Sean Gallagher running from business and Gavin Duffy running from business. They're a very interesting mix of candidates.
I
and the
would
big
agree.
question will be,
I would agree.
will Michael D actually get into debates with all of them?
Well,
Because I
let's
think he
see.
should.
Let's see. Thanks very much to you both.
Thank you.
We will see you soon. Now, plenty more to come on Ireland AM. Back after this break.